It is mid-early November, and once again I am walking through the stubble field. It's been my favorite place to walk. Sometimes there's so many leaves on the ground in some of my favorite paths that actually it's too loud to hear over the recording. I thought that the cracking and crunching of the leaves would be nice, but actually I realized it was so loud that the mic couldn't pick up on my voice. I'm walking through the stubble field. It also has the advantage of being far enough away from all the roads that you can't really hear traffic going by, which is nice. So for today, I've got actually really one of my favorite conversations I've had so far is with Shelby Copeland over at Force of Nature. And she's American. She lives over in Madison, Wisconsin. And you may have seen her on Instagram because she just has really fantastic videos on Instagram. She caught our eye because of her creative classes and her creative movement games that she does with her clients and her members. Um, and also, she's been working a lot with older populations. She's really worked with a little bit with everybody. But Shelby's really great because she didn't start off in the fitness industry. She described herself as sort of like an art nerd. Um, which I actually think is really good. I think some of the best people working in the industry in wellness and fitness and whatever you want to call it are people who come into it a little bit later in life. She's still young, but a little bit later in life. So they have a different perspective. I think sometimes if everyone goes through the classic personal trainer route, then they kind of end up uh, with a sort of constrained view of the world, and too much of it is kind of filtered through the traditional gym or fitness model. So yeah, Shelby did not start off as a fitness person, but you wouldn't know it because she's just an absolutely fantastic athlete. She moves really beautifully and is just very good at what she does. But she's also really thoughtful, really creative, and really comes at things from different angles. And I think I probably say it in the podcast, but more than anyone else out there, when I see her doing her videos, I feel like she's really aligned with what we're trying to do. You see, she has a really big focus on inclusivity, um, a big focus on working with different populations, a big focus on just making movement fun and focusing on solving movement problems. And she's just very good at what she does. She's also a very thoughtful person. She's got very good perspective. She is someone who has had issues with chronic pain in the past, so she talks about that and how she kind of uses movement to help deal with that. And we just talk about all sorts of things. She does talk a little bit about the challenges of being a woman in the space, especially the natural movement space, which tends to be coded as quite a masculine space, at least currently. So she talks about that and how that's an advantage. And also just gives some good recommendations that I think everyone would enjoy listening to. So this is Shelby Copeland from Force of Nature, and I think you're really going to enjoy this one.
How to stand on shifting sand. How to bend but stay intact.
Okay.
Lying on my stomach because I tweaked my back on Friday,
Sorry to
and
hear that.
yeah, it's okay. It's something I haven't done before. Not at this level, where I've just been, I'm slightly better now, but the first few days I couldn't get up. I was
Mm.
crawling everywhere.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
like just getting out of bed was like literally like 10, 15 minutes because I had such a narrow band of movement that didn't
Oh
cause like this
man.
jolting pain uh,
Oh,
down my back. Have you ever had anything like that before?
not back pain, but other pain. So
Yeah.
that sounds really intense.
Well, it's really made me think about my training because I still hold on to a lot of the kind of the powerlifting and CrossFit roots
Mm.
that I came from, but I think a lot of it's actually tied to ego because
Oh.
well, because the thing I've been saying the last few days, I realize my life isn't any better with like a 200 kg deadlift.
Mm.
It doesn't really affect my quality of life at all. And the more I think about it, the more I think that a lot of the barbell work I do is probably just a crutch because it's so specialized. It kind of,
Hmm.
the process of seeing the numbers go up is nice, or maintaining them. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I kind of think that transferability to other aspects of my
Mm.
life aren't there. And I've probably been neglecting a lot of movement quality and
Hmm.
mobility stuff because in the back of my head, I sort of think that I need to keep my squats at a certain level or my deadlifts at a certain level.
I get that though. I feel like something I really had to negotiate with my coach was letting go of barbell work.
Hmm.
Like I like begged him to like, hey, can I just like touch, can we just add some Olympic lift, like can we add some lifts in? And his approach doesn't, I mean, you can use a barbell as a tool,
Yeah.
but it's more about that in between strength, which you
Hmm.
talked about on your second podcast episode.
Yeah, that's right.
Um,
Good
yeah,
homework.
and like, oh yeah, I listened to him.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had to work through like this, not grief, but maybe ego is a better way of
Mm,
thinking about it, where I was like, but if I don't know how much I can lift, I don't know how strong I am. I don't know how, I don't know my one rep max deadlift. Like, where
yeah.
does that leave me in my strength? Okay, I can pick up this random rock, but like, what does that even mean?
Y-
Um,
Yeah, it's
I don't
funny,
know,
isn't
and
it?
I
We just
I
love to
think I
quantify things, don't we?
yeah, and I love progression so
Hmm.
much. So it's so hard to let go of that. Like, you're seeing the mountain move a little bit each week, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, now the mountain's just like till I die. That's really a long time. That's really
Yeah,
long.
it's true. It's funny because one of the first stereotypes I think a lot of people have before they go and work in a gym is that people who lift weights are dumb or stupid, or like
Mm,
that's the classic stereotype you'd see on
sure.
television. And then you get in there and you realize that actually some of the brightest people with like a very particular way of thinking are really into, weightlifting, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, or even
Yeah.
bodybuilding. And I think it definitely appeals to a certain type of person who really likes quantifying things. I've like the number of people I know who work as engineers and also do some form of bodybuilding is really
Mm,
interesting because it is a way for them to exert control, to quantify things, to say, look,
hmm.
I'm getting whatever is this many calories in, this many calories out. I can
Yeah.
check my volume, all my weights, all my lifts are going in the right direction. And you do see how that can be comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's interesting to think about other sports that I feel like attract that kind of mind. I feel like jujitsu is one of those,
Yes, definitely.
where it's all about being technical and like, but it is harder to quantify. Maybe you can get a technical skill, but like, what does that look like in a role, and what does that look like against a different opponent? And there's just so many variables. It's just
Yeah,
very,
this came up. So it's one of these things I've sort of been struggling with to find the right vocabulary. So, in our courses, we talk about this idea of essentially of arbitrary tasks,
hmm,
um, which when I use the word arbitrary, I mean something really specific. I mean like it's up to arbitration, and what I mean is there's some external judge who's going to decide whether or not
hmm,
you did a good rep, and it's been one of the interesting limitations thinking about CrossFit, even though CrossFit has all this emphasis on functional strength and capabilities and things. Ultimately, the competition often comes down to a judge saying yes, a good rep, no, a bad rep.
hmm,
Where I think Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is quite interesting because the way that it's task oriented is, well, essentially, did you get the tap, or did you get the
hmm,
tap? I guess without relying too much and overpowering the other person, did you get the the tap technically, rather than just I guess in jujitsu they say like writing out and just pushing somebody down.
hmm.
But there is like, yeah, I think the depth of jujitsu and all the decision trees that come into it, I see how that could appeal to people who are wired a certain
Hmm.
way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Um, well, since we started talking about pain anyway, I guess that might be
Sure.
a good place to start. So, who am I talking to right now?
Yeah, my name is Shelby Copeland. I live in Madison, Wisconsin, in the United States. I am a personal trainer, a movement coach, a mom, and also I edit videos on the side. I do that too. That's how I make money to do the other things.
Oh, that's good. We edit videos, but we often don't make money editing our own videos. That's a
Yes.
good skill to have. I'll have to ask you about that on a in a different context. Yeah, so we found you. Jill found you originally. I think on Instagram, based on the strength of your videos. She's like, "Oh, you need to come check out this Force of Nature person. She does really fun, interesting stuff." And she showed me some of the videos. And more than anyone else that I've seen on the internet, I feel like you post videos that are aligned with the things we try to do as well. And what I mean is you do a lot of videos where you incorporate games and problem solving and just really interesting sort of out of the box ways of thinking about whatever we want to call this: fitness, wellness, exercise. And I saw it and I was just immediately impressed. And I've already stolen so many of your ideas, or I've realized that you have done things that are very similar to activities I've done, but then I think you just did them in a really clever way. I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense than the way I've been doing it. So, yeah, I've just been watching your stuff, and then we had a chat off camera, off podcast a few weeks ago, and I was really surprised to find out that you haven't been in the fitness industry your entire life. You kind of struck me as someone who's been doing this forever, and that was like your main vocation. But that's actually not the case. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your history, what brought you into it, and anything else you think might be relevant.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I came into movement as a sedentary person. I I didn't do anything really until the age of 25, and a friend invited me to go surfing. We have these, the Great Lakes here, and I'm like,
Hmm.
you can't surf on a lake. She's like, yeah, you can. Let's do it. And I went out and I was so weak. I could not paddle out. I could not, I didn't have the endurance or the strength to even get out there, let alone surf. And that was like a huge turning point to me where I'm like, wow, strength is a gateway
Hmm.
into like a new world, into adventure. And I like it just immediately lit a fire in me to start being stronger. And I bought some DVD off the internet called Surf Strong. And I was like doing these little workouts in my basement. And my friend invited me to check out their gym. And, I like went into the gym. I didn't even own workout clothes. I had pajamas. I remember training in pajamas. I'm like, I don't even know what you wear what do you do? I had never played sports. I was like a sedentary person.
Yeah.
Um, no athletic background whatsoever.
Wait,
But
so just to cut you off, what did you do growing up? What were your hobbies and stuff?
I was like an art kid, like an art nerd.
Okay, art nerd. Okay.
I like made plays in my backyard, and like, oh, I made really bad like home movies. I like
Okay.
worked for our local cable station
Oh,
and
that's
like
cool.
made terrible SNL like videos that should be destroyed.
Well, that
um,
that explains why you do the video stuff now, though. Okay, so
yeah,
so you
yeah,
you you're an art nerd. Okay, so art nerd steps into
yep,
the gym, starts trying to make sense of it all. Okay.
yes, yes, and so I think because I had this perspective of like an alien being dropped into this new
Mm,
environment, I had no preset opinions. I had no like a lot of vocabulary I didn't even know. Like, all lifting terms and like what's a snatch? Like what's a
yeah,
jerk? I don't know what that means. Like when you say hit, like what are we talking about? Like what's a metcon? No
yeah.
idea. Um
So was it a CrossFit gym that was your first experience with gyms?
it was kind of like I the way I describe it is like a fitness studio. And
Gotcha.
so they mostly were focused around martial arts, but they were doing like
Oh,
boot
cool.
camps and kind of other almost like kind of obstacle course style
Oh, cool.
movement classes. Yeah.
Yep.
So kept with that gym and they ended up expanding into ninja. And so ninja is this awesome sport where it's all obstacle based
Yep.
and it's like really unique, fun, compelling challenges. And I just kind of started checking that out because that's what the gym evolved into and became like very addicted is maybe
Mm-hmm.
the word I would use.
Yeah.
Very challenged, like so I'd never met a movement challenge that was so hard, that was so compelling, that was so interesting. And I was like, well, now I have to find this whole other layer of strength that I didn't even know. Like I don't even know how to get there. So for me, like movement there's always been these like challenges or these invitations
Mm-hmm.
or these like compelling reaches that like pulled something out of my heart and like put it into this impossible seeming challenge. And I'm like, well, how do I break it into pieces and get there? Um, So like endless amounts of motivation to figure out these problems. And it didn't occur to me there's like entire systems that
Hmm.
exist to answer these, like
Yeah.
progressive overload and like, periodization. Like, so everything I learned about fitness was kind of like reverse engineered,
Yeah.
trying to get to this movement goal and this skill goal. And so most of the movement modalities I've explored have been based upon a challenge or based upon a movement skill I really want to tackle. And then I just like figure out how to get there.
Oh,
Um,
that's great. Yeah, that seems like such a better, I don't know, more utilitarian isn't the right word I'm looking for, but such a more useful way of coming at it. Because when I first got into strength or fitness or whatever, it was really just A, through traditional gyms, and then B, through the lens of powerlifting. And I never really thought
mm,
about what the problem was I was trying to solve. I just thought, well, if the weights go up on these three
mm,
lifts, then step one, get strong, step three, profit, sort of thing. It's like something good would come out of it. And I think that the metrics I was using were so much more limited, because I never really thought about solving problems or movement quality or
mm,
or anything like that. So one of the things you've talked about in the past too is that you're coming into movement also, you have a bit of a history of chronic pain, or you're dealing with some chronic pain conditions at that time as well.
hmm. Yeah. So as I kind of have started my movement journey, there were ups and downs. I did things wrong. There were setbacks. So one issue was I overtrained,
Mm,
way too much overhead movement. I didn't know about like resting. So
yep.
I would like train back to back days. I tore my labrum. Like I tore my shoulder
Okay.
labrum. Not
Yep.
even an acute injury, just wear and tear. And kind of found myself sidelined almost immediately after starting the sport of ninja. And
Hmm.
I realized, with that injury, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to train differently. Like I had to learn the hard way how to deal with that. But kind of stemming off of that experience, I started having like systemic pain, like chronic pain everywhere, and then other concerning symptoms like fatigue, hair loss,
Oh,
like
wow.
all like sleep problems, all these other things that were like my body letting me know something wasn't right.
Right.
um, Went kind of down a path of diagnosis, like figuring out what was going on, and found out I have chronic Lyme disease. So it's a
Oh, I see.
tick-borne illness,
Yeah.
and it, symptoms can present in different ways, but chronic pain is one of, like joint pain is one of the hallmarks of that vector-borne illness. And so I just had to suddenly start learning how to not only train better to prevent injury, but also how to like manage my stress levels better, manage recovery better, um, manage living with this chronic illness that expressed itself in joint pain, which inhibited all the things I wanted to do. And I remember just being so frustrated and so sad because I'm like, man, I just found this thing that like
Yeah.
resonated with my soul. Like I just started down this path, and now immediately like there's like, oh, it's over. And I really
Did
thought it was over.
did you so sometimes people say when they finally find the diagnosis, especially something chronic like Lyme disease, which is so tricky, sometimes people say that they find it like relieving to have some sort of diagnosis or some kind of hypothesis to work from. Was that the case for you, or
Hmm.
did you kind of find it dispiriting when you had that label?
I mean, to be honest, it was a mixed bag of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved because we kind of knew how to pursue it. On the other hand, I was devastated because it's a chronic illness I'll deal with the rest of my life.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of fear. I was afraid, what if I start losing cognitive function? What if I
Right.
start losing, my ability to move, which is so important to me? So there's a lot of fear. And, you know, thankfully, I'd had these experiences physically dealing with obstacles that I just started applying to the diagnosis. I'm like, okay, here's this insurmountable, unknown thing,
Mm.
like, Great Lakes surfing or a
Yeah.
bar to bar lache. I'm like, okay, so now how do I work backwards from this? if I want my quality of life to be as good as I can with an unknown, uh, disease, like what can I do today? What can I do today to start walking towards wellness? So a lot of it was like mental,
Yep.
and some books like um, uh, what is it called? The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Yep.
Like books that talk about like the obstacle being the challenge, being the point of the journey. Um, it really shifted my thinking to have to start working with limitations that were very real.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was like a powerful turning point because I realized like, oh, like there's a mental side of risk and challenge and obstacles, and it made me grow in a lot of ways. That was really positive. And also develop a lot of empathy for folks who are dealing with chronic pain and dealing with
Yep.
limitations and chronic illness. And that tends to be a lot of folks who I work with now are people who are coming out of seasons of pain or change. Um, and we're just working with, okay, so what can we do? What steps can we take? And how do we set realistic goals based on what's possible?
Yeah, I think
Um,
empathy is so important that you touched on that, because it's one of those things that I found that it's sort of, in a way, it's very hard to be a good coach if you don't have that life experience, because
mm,
initially your point of view is so constrained. And
mm,
if you go into a gym, and I'll use a CrossFit gym as a shorthand, you always have a few different coaches. You almost always have like the stud, the guy or or the woman who's just like, top competitive, absolutely shredded, like, naturally gifted athlete. And they're almost always the people that people will kind of gravitate to, because you have that natural
mm,
charisma of being just a really high level athlete. But I've always found that I've gotten better coaching from the older coach, from the person who you wouldn't necessarily expect, the person who doesn't
mm,
necessarily look like it, the person who's maybe like a little bit heavier or a bit older, or is dealing with their own illnesses, because I just find they have that perspective. And for
mm,
me, having recently injured my back, I always think that these injuries or these life experiences are kind of, a gift in some ways, because they do lend you this perspective. And I think it comes through in a lot of the activities that I see you share. It is, they're often done in such a way that they naturally sort of feel inclusive for people who aren't necessarily, high end athletes, but it still gives them
mhm.
opportunity to do that problem solving and everything.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
And you've identified exactly kind of what I'm trying to find is like how can we find like high challenge, high risk, or at least high arousal, in the
mhm.
everyday, walk into the local park. We don't have to train for 6 years and go climb the dawn wall to get
Yes.
this feeling of joy. We can do that at the local neighborhood park. And I think invitation goes a long way. And then
Mhm.
also like offering really compelling problems to solve, and that can be done with a ball or with like or with nothing, with each other. There's ways to kind of create this um, these interesting problems to solve with pretty much nothing.
Yeah, it's interesting. As someone who's been to like more than my share of fitness conventions and conferences, and you sort of see the industry just churn out these hyper specialized devices every few years, often the same things. You
Mm,
see them come through, and I think one of the things that's been very interesting about, I think, some of the movements that I guess in a way really needed the internet in order to coalesce. And whether it's like natural movement through organizations like MoveNat or parkour, or whatever you would call the space, that like Ido Portal is in, this sort of movement culture, is they're
mm,
able to do so much with just the environment, b, using perspective to create challenges, and then c, just sometimes simple tools. Like, you think of how much work can be done with, say, a tennis ball. um,
mm-hmm,
it's really incredible. So I guess, going back to your journey, um, so while you're sort of falling in love with fitness and movement, and it's becoming a big part of your life and who you are, you're also battling, chronic illness, and pain and everything that comes along with chronic Lyme disease. And at some point, I mean, I guess, what were you doing professionally at this point? And then can you tell me about how you started to put one foot in the door professionally in the movement sphere or in the fitness industry, or really however you think about your place?
Yeah, yeah. So at the time, I was a professional video editor. I was working for a local university in a video production unit, producing media for the university. And then the pandemic hit,
Mm,
and I had young kids, and I couldn't justify like plopping them in front of a computer screen to do
yes.
virtual preschool. So
Yes.
I left my job to homeschool my son for a year. Um, and my daughter was also around, but she was very young. So yeah, I was homeschooling during most of this time of kind of uh, healing
Hmm.
and figuring out what was going on. So yeah, I had not amazing amounts of energy, but we got some stuff done. We had some fun, but a huge lifeline for me became so I was like, okay, cool. I need to start moving differently. I know movement is going to be important for me to regain strength and heal. So I started kind of researching options, and I found MoveNat, and I had kind of found MoveNat through Katie Bowman, who
Hmm.
I feel like every single natural movement mom is familiar with.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the space owes a lot to Katie Bowman, and still I think someone who does such a good job of articulate articulately laying out the big picture in a lot of ways that sometimes
mm,
gets lost. Yeah, so Katie Bowman,
mhm.
great vector to get into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, um, read her books and found her work so interesting. So then kind of started checking out MoveNat. I'm like, oh, this is something I could do with my kids. Found out we have a MoveNat gym, like, 2 miles from my house. Like,
Cool.
what? So, um, we started going there during the pandemic, and I started like rebuilding strength and then also being mentored by the owner, Rock Hancock, who is an
Hmm.
incredible coach, incredible human. And he is the person single handedly that made me want to start shifting into being a trainer and being a
Hmm.
coach. His like just care, his knowledge, and then also like just a sense of play.
Mm.
I had never really experienced fitness in that way, and I'd never really um, conceived of it as a career that would be for me.
Hmm.
So just through kind of shadowing and learning under him, I was like, wow, I think this is really what I want to shift my career to. I don't think I want to go back to full-time video editing. So yeah, like kind of started from there building a career where I would kind of like piggyback on what he was doing. I kind of, help out, co-teach. So really got to, get a lot of experience working under him.
Hmm.
Um, from there, I went and got, an online NASM personal trainer certification,
Sure.
and I have other certifications like with pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise, and then also Parkour Silver, which is a parkour program for folks over the age of 50.
Yeah,
So yeah.
I'd like to talk about that later. So remind
Mhm.
me when we
Yeah.
get to that, because I think that's really interesting. Um, Generally, have you found most of your certifications quite useful, or do you sort of find that you pull mostly from the experience you've accumulated through coaching, or I'm sure it's a balance of both?
Honestly, real life experience
Yep.
is like the way my brain works.
Yep.
Online learning is so challenging for me. I got through it, essentially to hold the certification at the end, but really all those, the being able to ask a question in real time or like see how a client moves, like that for me is just the gold right there. And I don't think I'd be where I'm at today without working under Rock in that way. It was very transformative.
It's really important to have a mentor in this space, and one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is tacit knowledge. So um, obviously there's different ways of talking about this. Some people, they use the distinction of metis, which is like hands-on experiential tacit knowledge, and they compare it with techne, which is things that can be learned through a book. And I think I spent
Mm,
so much of my early life learning things through books, that it took me a long time just to realize how important the experiential knowledge is, especially for me, because I don't think I have a particularly good eye for kinesiology or movement or things like that. And it took me a long time to develop that. Um, and it is just one of those things you really need a mentor, because it's just so hard to
Hmm.
do these things online. It's one of the things I always feel bad for a lot of personal trainers, especially who end up in gyms,
Mm.
um, where there's this entire industry that's sort of set up to convince people that they need one more certification. Just get
Hmm.
this one more certification for $1,000 here, $500 there, and then that's going to give you what you need. Whereas with most things, it just comes down to apprenticeship and
Hmm.
experience. So, all right, so you're working with rock, and then you sort of realize that it's something you would like to do.
Hmm.
um, and how did that look? Did you start making videos online, or did you start finding your own clients through Rock's gym? Or yeah, how did that process work, if you actually kind of jumping in and thinking of
Yeah.
yourself as a coach?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do in the community is through different partnerships.
Hmm.
So, for example, I do a program at the library. They have this like wonderful movement space. So I come in as a facilitator and run like a class for small children.
That's cool.
I also work through our community and recreation department. So I
Hmm.
co-teach my parkour for seniors class with a physical therapist, and we just approached our local community recreation organization, and we're like, "Hey, would you be interested in taking this on? Taking us on, basically." And they took a risk, and they said yes.
Oh, that's great.
So I really tried to pursue partners. I try to go where people already are, where there's already like communities built, and then just kind of, I've worked with our local children's museum and done
Hmm.
programs there. So that's kind of the approach I've taken as far as like networking and finding groups of people who want to move in novel ways. But then as far as finding personal training clients, a lot of my clients have been um, virtual. So folks I find through either the MoveNat website, they have like a list of trainers on there
Hmm.
that I'm listed on, and then also just through Instagram and social media, just finding people, meeting people through that space. And I
It's
will say, the space I'm in, there's not a lot of women. Like, there's not a
Yes.
lot of female coaches in this space. So I do think that's why I've gotten so many internet leads, is because people are on Instagram for community, especially
Hmm.
women. They are looking for other women to connect with, to learn from, and to just like share experiences with, because there's not many of us. And so I think we kind of find each other. And so that's kind of been a natural way for me to meet folks and then work together
Yeah,
virtually.
that was actually the next question I wanted to ask you. So I'm glad you brought it up. Finding your space, and obviously you mentioned Katie Bowman already, who has been so influential in a lot of. I think a lot of the conversation that's sort of become illuminated or more legible over the last 5-10 years, whether it's people wearing barefoot shoes, or
Mm.
finding a balance of homeschooling, or how you think about nutrition and things like this. All these things that, like, I think probably 20, maybe 10, 15 years ago would have been quite alternative. And now I think a lot of people, regardless of their political background, I think have probably internalized a lot of these things. But, and I guess a lot of that actually probably is partially through Instagram and kind of the power of moms and networks and things
Mm.
like that, sort of giving a voice in a way that I guess wasn't easily seen. In a lot of ways, Instagram, I think, is quite female coded. If you look at the people who use it, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, I don't know, say Reddit or Twitter or something like that, where I would
Mm.
assume that the average user base probably skews more male. So yeah, it's an interesting space, and I mean, I think that being a woman in the space is probably gives you a good perspective, and you kind of realize the shortcomings um, of a lot of the fitness industry and a lot of the fitness space, where it sort of does have a male bias. So what jumped out at you? I mean, what are some things that you think the fitness industry or the wellness sphere, whatever you want to call it, really misses out on by not having a
Mm.
more female perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I can think specifically about some of the branding choices of, like,
Hmm.
I'd say natural movement brands, maybe. A lot of shirtless men
Yeah.
running through the woods. You
Yes.
know, kind of this like narrative of like the alpha male and
Yeah. Becoming
you know,
Tarzan. Yeah.
I love the book Natural Born Heroes. Don't get me wrong, like I
Hmm.
love it.
Yep.
Um but you know, this kind of like main character of your epic story.
Yes.
But I think what is missed is that women want to be the main character of their stories too. And they want to be strong to be useful to serve, you know, not only themselves and their joy and their, you know, feeling good, but also serve their family, also serve their community. And I think, you know, fitness isn't just this like lone wolf, you know, like
Hmm.
running wild. You know, I think there's like this story of this like lone warrior in the woods, and it's like women want to be strong, but we tend to come in packs. You know, we tend
Yes.
to really need this community, um, this social aspect, and I think that where there's folks who are hungry for it. They want to bring their kids along. They want to bring their
Yes.
friends along. They want to, you know, like teach it to other people. And there's like this share, like strength and sharing
Hmm.
that I think gets missed when we focus on the lone warrior. And I think natural movement is such an amazing fit for mothers, for parents, for families, because it's just movement patterns we all know. And we
Yes.
just get to practice in different contexts with each other. And I think it doesn't have to look like a sport. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to, you know, it doesn't have to have a certain objective like climbing or, you know, grappling. It can be more open ended. And I think therefore it can be practiced anywhere. And that's kind of the power of it. And it's kind of missed when we just focus on certain narratives.
I mean, I think you nailed it right there. Yeah, it is so interesting. I think you're exactly right about the sort of alpha male narrative, or this idea of being a lone hero, being a lone wolf, which has never been true. I mean, everything has always been done in the context of a community of different levels. Whether it's packs or tribes or whatever. This idea that there would be one person. I think we always see, we see anthropologically that you know packs are set up in such a way to encourage teamwork. If
Mm,
you hear all these stories of like if somebody becomes too cocky or thinks they're too good, then other people in the band will work in such a way to ensure that they're like lightly ostracized or made fun of. Not that I'm saying that's what
mm,
we should do, but we have these mechanisms to kind of prevent that. And I think the internet being such an echo chamber, sometimes it's easy to for people to kind of fall for their own shtick, or for this kind of cult or guru
mm,
personality to emerge. And I've always, one of the things we've said at Wild Strong is that it's not just that we're trying to build heroes, because that's the common narrative. We're trying to build the sort of community
mm.
that can raise heroes, if we want to use that. And I also enjoyed the book
Yeah.
Natural Born Heroes, but you're right, it's so much of the emphasis is on the individual, where it needs to be done in a social setting. You can't build a house by yourself, you can't
Hmm.
start a community by yourself. And that's always seemed like such a missed opportunity, especially where so much of fitness is about the individual. There's always conversations about willpower and doing this by yourself and pushing yourself
Mm,
harder. And I always think it's such a missed opportunity when people drive to a gym by themselves, put in
mm,
their headphones, listen to their music, do what they're doing by themselves, get angry if there's someone else around them taking up their equipment,
hmm.
and then just treating it as an isolated journey without thinking about how does this fit back into community, whether it's through that idea of of being useful, or whether it's
Hmm.
just this idea of like building cross connections and support and mutual aid that would normally come out of any kind of physical activity.
Yeah.
No, I think you're spot on about that, and you just hit on so many things that are really important to what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just going to say, I think the work that you're doing is amazing because it centers, you know, like health as far as, you know, if we talk about older adults, like what are like the top three predictors of dementia? It's all like related to social interactions, even,
Exactly.
you know, and even if it's just literally chatting with like someone at a store, like that is so beneficial for your mental health. Loneliness is so pervasive and such a
Hmm.
huge mental health issue. And so I love the work you're doing where you're getting folks together. You've already solved one, you know, health issue there. You're moving your bodies, and then you're outside, like having this adventure, having this experience together.
Yeah,
And
I
I,
mean
you know,
that's
it's amazing.
Thanks. I mean, it's literally all we're trying to do. We're just trying to get people outside together, moving.
Yeah.
That could be our catch line. And it's funny
Yeah.
how sometimes that feels like an alien idea. I guess since we're talking about older populations, it might be a good time to talk about PK Silver because
Hmm.
um, I had this conversation with Dan Edwards actually yesterday, and
Mm,
I was asking him if parkour has an image problem in terms of uptake, and I think he gave a very good answer that it didn't. But there's
mm,
something that makes me sad where I feel like there's this sort of high watermark where I feel like even 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I feel like I saw more, and maybe it's because I live abroad now, but I feel like I saw more parkour in popular culture in terms of it being something that people were aware of. And I remember that at one point there were at least 3 or 4 interesting organizations who were working with older adults and trying to introduce parkour and movement problem solving. And the last
mm,
time I looked around, none of those organizations seem to exist anymore, at least not in the UK.
mm,
And I found that Parkour PK Silver was still up, and I saw that they had a course listed in August. So I kept on emailing them because I really wanted to get in. I really wanted to get in because I really
hmm,
liked their stuff, and I wasn't able to. And then
hmm,
I found out that at least one way or another they'd stopped operating. I think
hmm.
I was wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, you are correct. PK Move is the umbrella organization over PK Silver.
Hmm.
They are no longer operating, and so there's actually a group of us of instructors who are trained in the PK Silver curriculum
Hmm.
that we're trying to revive the curriculum and let it live again under a different umbrella organization. So it might be too soon for me to talk about that, but we are talking to folks in the United States that could kind of help us carry the torch forward. So nothing officially in the works yet, but it is something we want to start offering for people who want to be trained to use parkour as a modality to work with older adults.
Hmm.
So stay tuned. We're working on it. We're in meetings right now in curriculum development. But the thing we love about the parkour, or sorry, yeah, the PK Silver curriculum is that it is data based. So a
Mm.
lot of the movements that are in the curriculum are based on fall prevention data. So, what are the most common causes of falls in older adults, and like what are common strength losses, and how can we help being aware of develop peripheral vision. And so a lot of the movements that are in there are addressing those issues head on and are really successful. And I feel like you see change pretty quickly with folks that you work with using this modality. Like our group, we've had some people taking the class for 3 years now, and like we've seen posture change, we've seen people gain strength, we've seen everyone loves to share stories about uh, falling outside of class. Like, oh
Oh,
yeah, I
cool.
fell, but I landed right on my bum, and everything was fine. I buckled my knees, and
Yeah.
so we're starting to kind of collect our own anecdotes and stories and data as well, kind of apart from the original curriculum. And so we're kind of just hoping to start merging those things together into something we could teach other trainers and other
Well,
community members.
that's so cool, and it's so needed. And good luck with that because I'd be one of the first people in line to do some of the training because it just seems like such a good resource. And it's like you said, I think that they collected so much good information and just some of the techniques and progressions that I saw. It would be a shame if it didn't keep on going,
Hmm.
um, because it's one of the things that we've been frustrated with over here. Especially when we're working. With different locations, and obviously the structures in the UK are a little bit different from the US.
Hmm.
But you try to get physical activity with older adults, and so often people say, "Well, we have a chair yoga class," and
Mm.
again, it's one of those things that just feels like a missed opportunity, especially if there are people who are capable of walking and they're quite strong and then they
Mhm.
come in, they drive over to, it would be done here at like the village hall, and they drive into local village hall, and they come over and they sit down and they do their 45 minutes of chair yoga. And like, I think there are probably amazing benefits for that, for people who are chair bound or people who don't have the
Mhm.
confidence. But again, it just feels like a missed opportunity to build up these different capabilities and skills that I feel would really carry over. And sometimes I think that the tyranny of yoga and Pilates, which I think overall, I guess is a force for good. I'm going to hedge my statement here, but I think perhaps it has prevented people from engaging in things that might have more benefit for that population.
Yeah. Yes, and something I've noticed is, yeah, a lot of folks, when they come in and we're like, "What would you like to get out of this class?" And they're like, "I'd like to be more flexible." I'm like, "Oh, cool. Like, that's good, but
Yeah.
do you wanna be stronger? Do you wanna be more aware of your surroundings? Do you wanna be more playful and creative? Like, there's so many other things besides
Yes.
flexibility that are super beneficial, and thankfully, like, we just kinda introduce it, and people start getting it. They start understanding, or kinda similar to my experience years ago where I couldn't paddle out on a wave. They
Hmm.
encounter a challenge that's so compelling to them. They're like, "What do I need to do to get here?" Like,
Yep.
I want a safety vault. How do I get my shoulders stronger?" Um, so I think that's like kind of the good stuff, and kind of what I love about parkour as a modality is it's a lot of peer teaching and learning, and also like things emerge in the group in a really
Hmm.
organic way um, through this concept of jams. So parkour, instead of having like conferences or meetups, there's jams, and
Hmm.
there's typically some leadership around it, but a lot of it is led by the people who show up. Like, things emerge through interactions, or you see someone dealing with a challenge, and then you get an idea, and then you're sharing these ideas together. So it's this very like organic way of sharing knowledge. And I really do see that emerging in our class, especially with students who have been doing the class longer. They're sharing their knowledge with the new students, and it's just very cool how kind of things unfold and build upon each other.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I think that's so important. And going back to what I was saying about the tyranny of Pilates and yoga, it
mhm,
is it is interesting that so many, I'll just say, fitness organizations, I guess, fall into the same pattern of having, the one person at the top and the guru, up to the point
mhm,
where you're not even allowed to help the other people in the class. Often you'll get
mhm.
yelled at and say, "Hey, who's the coach? I'm the coach. I'm the
Yeah.
font of all knowledge here." And I understand why that structure emerges, and I understand why it makes sense depending on the assumptions of the modality that people are doing. But again, it just seems like
Mhm,
such a lost opportunity to socialize and to kind of create that culture of every group. And just in terms of sustainability, I mean, in a social aspect, the more people you can get learning and teaching from each other, it's just going to make a much
mhm,
more robust community. And I think parkour does that better than almost any other practice I can think of. And I've been very excited to see, you know, in some ways, I think some of the old generation of parkour, not that it's dying out, and not that I ever think parkour was exclusive. I think parkour has always had a very good culture, but I think people feel more welcome now. I think that there's a lot of interesting
mhm,
organizations that are popping up that really focus on inclusivity and different kinds of parkour that are appropriate to different people's abilities. So it's sort of losing some of that image that it's just like young guys
mhm,
jumping over buildings or jumping from building to building. And we're seeing that there's lots of different ways we can apply parkour. And I think
mhm.
you pointed me towards the Movement Creative, which is an organization I'd seen before but never really delved into. And you shared, what is the book called? The Jesse
Yeah,
Danger book.
Embrace Challenge by
Yeah,
Jesse Danger.
Embrace Challenge, which I really enjoyed. It's a great read, and you can literally read it in a day or two, in one or two sittings.
Mhm,
And what I loved about it is it's just his attempt to make sense of teaching and movement and community via different models that he's
mhm,
created, or that he's picked up on. And that's the way that a lot of my teaching has worked as well. Is I've just tried to come up with different models to make sense of things. And I guess that's one of the things I'd like to use the last few minutes to talk about is This
Hmm.
is such a broad topic. Like you cover so many different things with your clients and your members. How do you begin to make sense of it all? Like what are some models that you use when you're trying to come up with activities or when you're trying to plan different movements? Like what's your process for trying to take all these ideas and then trying to turn them into something that's actionable or practical?
Yeah, I think I am just so thankful that I have such a diverse amount of experience
Mm,
as a practitioner. So a lot of it comes from my mentor, working directly under Rock. And then also, I'm just so curious about movement. I just am like in all these different movement spaces. Like, I call myself a movement generalist because
hmm
I love to dabble, I love to explore. And one of my reasons behind, like, getting into grappling and martial arts and climbing is I love seeing how teachers teach those modalities and teach those sports. And so not only am I benefiting by learning the activity itself, but I'm also seeing how the coaches are coaching that activity. So a lot of what I do is kind of collect material from other coaches
hmm
as a student or as a mover, and I just kind of notice what emerges and what opportunities are there. And so, for example, when I am organizing an adult recess, which is when I get groups of strangers together to play on playgrounds,
Oh, that's
um,
great.
the first thing I do is I look at the space and I kind of walk through, I explore, I look at it, and like, ooh, this is like a good hide and seek spot. There's lots of dark, hiding areas, there's lots of good connections. Or, if like the equipment itself is really interesting. All right, we're going to play the floor is lava, or we're going to play, a game where we can't touch the ground or whatever.
hmm
So for me, it usually starts with the environment because I don't know who's going to be there. I don't know who's
Yep.
going to show up. I have no idea. And then the second thing is when people arrive, things immediately start evolving. Like the group dynamic itself is going to kind of matter in that space.
hmm
So I'm always ready to adapt and flex my ideas. And I actually leave a lot of space in my games for games to shift and change on the spot. So, if something isn't fun or if it's inequitable, if there's someone who has limited mobility, like, okay, you're the prison guard, or like, we can only crawl. We modify to include everyone.
Yes.
And I think that's something that children do really well is
hmm
like, if someone isn't having fun or someone storms off, the game changes. They shift, they evolve really rapidly. So I try to hold my plans loosely because I know that's going to happen. Um, and there's some nice models in the Embrace Challenge book around picking a challenge that's compelling, system of an activity design sheet, class flow. So there's all these like great little models in here. But in general, I think I just kind of go off of my own experience as a mover and working with other coaches and just seeing what they have done that seems to be successful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I just as you were saying, children are very good at sort of calibrating or moderating their games, and I love watching my kids play to see. You're exactly right. I mean, if someone's going too hard, if the other kids aren't going fun or having a nice time, if someone storms off, then that can cause the game to end. So they're
Mm-hmm.
very good at thinking on the fly, of just thinking about different handicaps or superpowers or rules changes
Mm-hmm.
or changing the space. And I think we talked about this last time we were chatting, but and then you added something to this that I want to thank you for. I've started making these foam swords for the kids, and I guess they're foam swords like they use in LARPing, where I just get
Mm-hmm.
like an old golf shaft or something like that and wrap it insulation. And just over the course of the summer, I ended up making something like 20 different swords and shields,
Nice.
like big long swords and pole arms and little short swords and everything. And we just sort of have this library now where all the neighborhood kids come over and just play. And they'll just play for hours. It's amazing. And it's been such a good outlet, especially because there's a few kids in the group who aren't especially athletic or aren't really
Mm-hmm.
inclined to do sports. And it's really made me think about how myself as well, I was never great at sports growing up, and there are all these activities that I love to do, but I didn't like sports. I didn't like the structure of playing a
Mm.
game of soccer, playing a game of baseball. But then I love things like capture the flag and building forts and, yeah, hitting people with sticks and stuff back and forth. and I think we're much better at that. But you brought my attention to, is it jugger?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
I'd never seen this before. I just started looking up on YouTube, and I'm so excited about it. I think I'm going to try to start a kids league in our village, because it's
Oh,
essentially what's
fun.
happening already without the same rules. But can you kind of talk about that and how you found it and how you've been playing around with that?
Yeah, so there's someone in my community who started a jugger league in Madison, and I had never heard of it. They invited me because they're like, "Hey, you seem like an adult who likes to play. Like, do you want to come hit people with foam swords?" I'm like, "Yes, I 100% want to do that." And they just really thoughtfully designed, practices, weapons practice, and little mini games. Like there's a game called Chain Breaker, and there's this one weapon called a chain that's like, essentially like a ball on the end of a long string, and you can like whip it around and like let it go
It's
and
so
hit
cool.
people. So
Um,
there's like specific technique to like stop the chain and like
yeah,
yeah.
it's one of
So
those things, people have to look it up on YouTube, because it didn't seem like it would work, this idea of having a ball tied to a chain or a rope, but you see people using them in the games, and it's absolutely incredible, and it's very it has an almost ballet, or sort of like Hong Kong sort of kung fu movie
yeah,
quality to it, where the moves that emerge from this are just absolutely beautiful.
absolutely. Yeah. So that, there's even if two players show up, there's plenty to do. You can do weapons practice. You can, do like, if you have like some kind of dummy or a tree, you can practice, precision. So for me, just as like a movement generalist, I'm like, well, this is so many cool movements. And like, like you have to be kind of strategic, like chess. So, just so many fun things to try in that space.
Yeah,
Um,
it's something
I've t-
oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I've taken the idea and kind of simplified it for
Hmm.
my senior citizens that I work with. We use
Oh,
just like
cool.
pool noodles.
Yeah.
We play this game called like foot fencing, so we're both trying to hit each other's feet with the
Y-
noodle,
yeah.
and then we're blocking each other with the noodle as well, and it's just very silly and very fun.
That's cool. I tried some of the I think I can't remember what they call it, last standing flamingo, which is something I pulled from Movement Creative, which is, sort of the pushing hands, but done with the feet very gently. And
Mm,
I've been doing that with my older adults class, and it
how
really
fun!
works. Yeah, you never know. Sometimes, it's, as you said, you do an activity, you think it's gonna be fun, and it's not quite working. So you have to think, well, what do I have to change, or what can I modify? And it's worked really well. But I'm just like, something about the juggers got me really excited, because I see it as a low cost, low barrier opportunity, just to. I think it would work multi generationally, as long as you picked
Mm,
sort of the weapons and the rules. And I think it's one of those things that I think it'll be a really just fun way to get a lot of the kids in, even if they don't want to play
hmm.
soccer or football out here. We're coming up in the hour, so I guess I just kind of want to ask you, what are some things that you're excited or optimistic about, in terms of movement, exercise, just trends that you feel really good about, or something that you think more people should know about?
Yeah, I think that in general, I'm just so excited that people are taking their movement outside in a non-sport specific way. So I think it's really common, when you're in your 40s or whatever, to be like, I should sign up for a marathon, like
Yeah, yeah.
I should just go do this. And I think that, I'm really hopeful that the emergence of play-based learning and play kind of coming back into like an acceptable thing for adults to do. Like National Geographic just had an article about how adults should play more.
Oh,
I
cool.
think non-sport specific play,
Hmm.
maybe even we could just call it like jams. Like
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see more of that kind of movement, and maybe we could even call it fitness. But like adults playing together more, and making sure it's a priority for their mental health. And it's not always with kids, maybe it is, but um I'm feeling like it's becoming more socially acceptable.
Hmm.
And there's more research around play. There's the National Institute of Play that puts out interesting papers and
Yeah.
research. So I'm just kind of curious to watch like what play-based learning emerges and looks like. I think play is really accessible. It's really it's not equipment specific. You know, as we talked about before, we don't need specialized equipment to play. We don't need design environments to play. We just
Hmm.
need ideas and community and, you know, maybe some green space. And we can do a lot with that. So I don't know. I think maybe I'm just hopeful that adults play more
Yeah,
and that we start seeing the benefits of that and how it doesn't take like a trained coach to lead something like that. It really can just emerge from a group of
that's
friends or from the
such an
community.
important factor, is that you don't need to be a coach. You don't need to think of yourself as a coach. You just need to get people together and go out and try it. I agree 100%. Um,
Yeah.
who's someone else that we should talk to on the podcast? Who's someone you think that more people should know about, or someone that has good ideas?
Oh
Yeah, I didn't
gosh.
tell you I was going to ask you that, so I've ambushed
I
you.
mean, I'm gonna like this is like pie in the sky. Are you familiar with Michael Easter and his book The Comfort Crisis?
I know the Comfort Crisis, but I
Okay.
do not know Michael Easter. I
Michael
mean, I guess
Easter's
he's a
really he's really interesting. He talks about like misogi, about like
sure,
picking
yeah,
like a really big challenge for yourself, like kind of on a
yeah,
yearly basis. He talks about, you know, he just has all these awesome things to say and think about with movement and challenge and yeah, like just is a very level-headed, very practical person
yeah.
um talking about those things. So he'd be
And
really fun to talk to.
I, I guess in with play and everything like that, I think this idea of growth is also something that people do a better job of talking about now, and not even in just kind of like a roll your eyes TED talk kind of way, but actually just what does it mean to give people opportunities to grow and kind of
Mm.
improve and adapt and things like that. Um, and yeah, it's nice to have some space for people to talk about these ways in a way that doesn't feel like exclusive or like something that's only just for a particular kind of hyper competitive person.
Hmm.
All right, well, I'll tell you what. In a few years, if the podcast takes off, we'll give it a go. We'll see
Yeah.
if we can get see if we can get him on.
I don't know, why not? We could try.
Yeah, no, that's well, like you said, set a challenge and make it happen. All right,
Yeah, there we
gauntlet's
go.
been thrown. Thanks so much for your time. This was really, really good. I really appreciate it. You touched on so many important ideas, and you just said things I think in a way much better than I could have said myself. So really, thank you.
Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise. It's a daily exercise.
Okay, so that was my chat with Shelby. I'd really like to get her on again, just because when I turned the recording off, we actually had another really nice conversation for another 20 minutes or so. And she gave just a bunch of really good reading recommendations, some very thoughtful recommendations on poetry, which is something I'm trying to read a bit more of because I don't think I spent enough time on reading nonfiction, or I guess it's not even nonfiction. I don't know. I think poetry is sometimes a good way to encapsulate truth that isn't always captured in big monologues. Um, and I'm going to go ahead and give you some links in the show notes to a few things we've talked about. Check her out on Instagram because she is a really great follow. I've already borrowed a lot of ideas from her because I think she just does some of the most creative activities. So if you are someone who's currently working with the movement community, she's a great follow. And really interested to see what she does with some of the parkour um, for older populations in the future, because I think that's a really great opportunity, and it's sad that there aren't many organizations doing it anymore. All right, take care.